Welcome to the Library of Congress. Thank you for joining us. Let's welcome to the stage Karen Donfried, the Director of the Congressional Research Service.
Good evening and welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Karen Donfried, the Director of the Congressional Research Service, which is part of the library. And I am thrilled to welcome all of you to a conversation between two legends of American broadcast journalism who are also published authors, Norah O'Donnell and Dana Bash. Norah's debut book, the one we're here to talk about tonight, is entitled We the Women, The Hidden Heroes Who Shaped America, which she co-wrote with Kate Anderson Brower. You may have guessed that Norah timed the publishing of her book with the 250th anniversary of this country. We here at the library are producing a number of terrific events to celebrate America's anniversary year, from book events like this, to music concerts, to screenings of classic American films from our National Film Registry, and exhibits that share some of the library's treasured historical artifacts with you. You can check out the events at loc.gov. We hope you will make many return visits. Norah, as I'm sure you know, is CBS News' senior correspondent, focused on big interviews and projects for the network. She spent more than 5 years as the anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News. Dana Bash is CNN's chief political correspondent, anchor of Inside Politics with Jake Tapper, and co-anchor of the State of the Union. Dana's first book, America's Deadliest Election, which she co-authored with David Fisher, details the 1872 Louisiana gubernatorial election. It debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, and someone told me Dana will have a new book out later this year, so stay tuned. Norah and Dana won't be signing books after this event, but we're offering pre-signed copies of Norah's new book for sale, as well as copies of Dana's book for sale, just at the end of the hallway you used to enter the auditorium. Because of our speaker schedules, we won't be able to have a Q&A tonight. Thank you so much for joining us at the Library of Congress, and I want to invite you to join me in watching an introductory video that will share some of Norah's remarkable book with us. Thank you.
Looking back on my life and the things I dreamed about as a little girl from San Antonio, Texas, never, ever would I have imagined that life's journey would bring me to the most extraordinary places.
This is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and yet nature's fury has decimated it.
Oh my gosh, wow.
A magnificent farewell to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
To meet the most fascinating people in the world.
So you're the only one with this amount of stripes in this star.
Yes, exactly.
I think that many people who are firsts feel a responsibility to do a good job.
How did surviving cancer prepare you for this mission?
I think it taught me a lot about going out of my comfort zone.
To, yes, become only the third woman in history to lead a broadcast evening news program.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We are going to begin with breaking news.
To anchor election nights.
Tonight, America decides. Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump, control of the White House and Congress at stake.
To interview every living president. To meet princes.
What do you think your mother, Princess Diana, would think about what you've done here for veterans?
I'd hope she'd be, incredibly proud.
And pop stars.
Are you out there? 1, 2, 3, 4.
My goodness, hi,
I'm Norah O'Donnell. Well, of course you are. And you're
You think I don't know that?
And incredibly, the first ever American interview with a pope.
Do you like when you are called the people's pope?
El Papa de la gente.
At the heart of what I do is listen and ask questions.
Are higher prices here to stay? If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing? Why are you taking so long? Why do you think the Taliban is afraid of educating girls?
When women and girls are educated, when they are aware of their rights, then these women can challenge them and they can tell them that you cannot say this to us.
In an effort to uncover the truths that are sometimes painful to hear.
Whatever happened to that cadet?
He graduated.
And what happened to you?
I left.
Or that hold the powerful to account.
Tonight, the U.S. Army is responding to our exclusive CBS News investigation into sexual assault in the military and acknowledging they must do better.
Because the freedom of the press is as old as America, a fundamental constitutional right. As a mother of 3 kids, my job has meant sacrifice and stories I've never told about sexism and fights for equal pay.
To be paid equally, it's not about what they think it's fair, it's what is fair.
And that's why writing this book, for the past 3 years, studying the hidden heroes in history, the women we don't learn about in school, the women who changed America, has inspired and invigorated me.
It's up to you to be the master of your fate, the captain of your soul, and most importantly, the master of your happiness. No matter what, I'm going to be okay.
Because women are the true architects of society, the revolutionaries who have pushed us to live up to those ideals outlined in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the pages of this book, we unlock stories that have been buried in history, because now is the time, now is our moment, to recognize the power of women's stories and voices, because we, the people, can no longer ignore we, the women.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Norah, I cannot tell you how honored I am to sit with you and talk to you about anything, but especially this book.
And well, thank you. And thank you to have Dana Bash moderate this conversation. You know it's going to be good.
So just to sort of set the table here, I first met Norah reporting. I think maybe we crossed paths on the Hill a little bit, but for sure we covered the White House together. We were on, sometimes on Air Force One during George W. Bush's re-election campaign, mostly on the press charter. And I got to see up close and personal how amazing a reporter and a journalist this woman is, and just what a wonderful person she is, and a human and a friend. And so she's the real deal, guys. She really is. She really is. So knowing that, let's dive into this fantastic book. Talk generally about the women that you chose in this book and why.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'm glad to see a packed house. I wrote this book because we're celebrating America 250, America's birthday, but also because in my journalistic career, I've always tried to shine a spotlight on women. And so as we mark this occasion of America's semi-quincentennial,
say that 5 times fast.
I wanted to make sure that women were not a footnote anymore in American history, because women have been front and center throughout our nation's history. And so the women in this book are patriots. They're change makers, they're inventors, they're builders, they're soldiers, they're poets. They're the most incredible women, and I enjoyed learning about them. And I have to admit, too, I'm embarrassed that I knew so few of these stories. And it was helpful reading from the National Women's History Museum that only 15% of what is taught in school focuses on the achievements and accomplishments of women. And so with this book, I hope we can begin to change that. And here's the other really interesting, thank you, yes. And the other really interesting thing that I learned is, of course, on July 4th, I love July 4th, I love a good pool party and hot dogs and the whole thing, a belly flop contest, is we're marking, of course, the Declaration of Independence. And those 13 words that make up that sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That sentence is among the most important in all of human history, right? It's the foundation from which our country was founded. It has kick-started every great revolution in American history. And women kept saying, why aren't we included in that? And so there was the abolitionist movement, the suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, the labor movement. And women were leading all of those movements. And so you'll find those stories in this book.
It really is. And I have to say, I'm with you. I read these stories, story after story, saying, why don't I know about these women? And I was embarrassed that I didn't know about these women, but the good news is I do now.
I mean, there's a woman's name on the Declaration of Independence.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that, because this is crazy that I had no idea. Can you talk about her, about the fact that she signed it, and then also what she did after it was signed?
So the Declaration, the first official printing of the Declaration of Independence happened in 1777. The British troops were moving in on Philadelphia, so the Second Continental Congress moves to Baltimore. And they say, look, we need an official printing of the Declaration of Independence. We need all 56 male signatories on it, because we're going to distribute it to the 13 colonies. We need it done in 2 weeks. We need it set perfectly. Who do they turn to? A woman, who just happens to be the postmaster in Baltimore and a printer. Well, she doesn't just only gather all the signatures. She then prints it and puts her full name on the bottom. It says, printed by Mary Katherine Goddard. And here's what's so interesting about that. She was also a publisher of the paper in Maryland, which she had said M.K. Goddard. And even though I think her story is buried in history, she wanted us to know her as Mary Katherine Goddard. She put her name on that Declaration of Independence for a reason, and dealt with incredible discrimination, later was fired from her job as postmaster, even though Benjamin Franklin had originally put her in that spot, and was replaced by a man because they said, this is too much travel for a woman to do. She appealed directly to President George Washington to get her job back. She did not. But I think her story deserves the recognition because it's right there, and I just saw it 2 weeks ago in Philadelphia, the actual copy of the Declaration of Independence with her name printed on the bottom.
Yeah, and now we do know it's not just MK, it's Mary Katherine. Just kind of taking a step back about what you said about, we the people and all men and founding fathers, and we have heard, I learned stories about Abigail Adams, like don't forget the women and things like that, but the reality is that society was so different then. And so, yes, you had women like Mary Katherine and you had Abigail Adams, but in learning about her story and others sort of during that time period, since this is the 250th, which is a big sort of peg for this book, what else did you learn?
Well, there were so many incredible revolutionary women. Mary Katherine Goddard printed the Declaration of Independence, but a woman named Phyllis Wheatley, a poet, inspired it. And Phyllis Wheatley was an enslaved young girl who was brought over from Africa on a boat called the Phyllis. And she was 7 years old from Senegambia. She was bought by the Wheatley family, who educated her, and she became an amazing poet. and spoke about freedom. She tied the themes of slavery and wanting freedom from slavery to the American desires for freedom from the British monarchy. George Washington called her a genius. She's known as the poet laureate of the American Revolution. Now, a lot of people know who Phyllis Wheatley is, historians do, but I did not know who she was. And she has an incredible, incredible story, and so I share some of her poetry in the book. The other revolutionary woman that I just love is Mercy Otis Warren, who is in there. And so you mentioned Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams and John Adams, of course, they're the big power couple at the time, and Abigail Adams is always saying to him, remember the ladies, make sure you include women in the Constitution, and he dismisses her. Well, they had another power couple set of friends, the Warrens. Mercy Otis Warren was considered the leading intellectual of the Revolutionary period. But she was an anti-federalist. And so she wrote a great deal about, well, we can't have all this power in the federal government. We need to protect individual liberties. So Mercy Otis Warren is known as the secret muse of the Bill of Rights. Incredible. And when she publicly disagreed with her friend John Adams on principle, it cost her their friendship, because John Adams replied to her publicly and said, history is not the province of ladies. But I think this book proves that history is indeed the province of ladies.
There we go. That deserves applause. I mean, you're kind of touching on this with just these early stories that you're telling, but one of the big themes of the book throughout history and the history that you tell is so much discrimination, so much just degradation from men of women, despite the obvious intellect that so many of these women had, and the men admitted that they were so smart.
Yes. I mean, I sort of say one of the themes that comes up is, rejection. And a lot of these women used rejection and chose redirection, right? They turned pain into perseverance. I tell the story of Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman to graduate from medical school in America in 1864. She had applied to 30 different medical schools, got into one as a joke. They didn't think she was going to show up, and she did. And she became the first woman to graduate. And today I have a sister who's a physician, or if you have a physician as a friend, or in your family, you will see on February 3rd, they're always posting pictures on social media of them kind of back in the room with a birthday cake, because February 3rd is Elizabeth Blackwell Day. And so today they still celebrate her. And what I think about that too is today, a majority of medical school graduates are women. The data shows you're going to have a better outcome at the hospital if you are treated by a female surgeon.
Your sister is a doctor, but so is your father, who is a fantastic doctor. Don't take that personally. One of the stories that I really love is Anna Dickinson, who was an orator at a time when women certainly didn't go around making big speeches, and she was very, very young.
Yeah, and I'm glad it's interesting you brought up Anna Dickinson too. Gayle King also was like, I cannot believe this story of Anna Dickinson.
It's a crazy story.
So here we are in the Civil War, and there's a young woman named Anna Dickinson. She had Quaker parents. Her parents were abolitionists. They'd had Frederick Douglass at her house. She began giving speeches at a young age. The Republican Party asked Anna Dickinson to go and campaign for about 24 candidates to help them, because support for the Civil War was waning at the time. And because she was such a great speaker, a real firebrand, a real, an orator, they called her the Joan of Arc of speech making, she got an invitation to speak before Congress. So at 21 years old, Anna Dickinson became the first woman in history to speak to the US Congress. And she's there, talking about the abolitionist movement in the midst of the Civil War, and who comes in the middle of her address? President Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln. And she kind of lectures him a little bit.
About Reconstruction.
About Reconstruction. I mean, can you imagine the bravery and boldness of her? She ends up, it's a long speech, she ends up endorsing his re-election, which he was happy about. But incredible to think about in that time. And women weren't even educated. They couldn't go to school. And here she is there addressing U.S. Congress and sort of lecturing the President of the United States. So it just goes, I think these stories are so important because even without any really rights, they had no legal rights, no voting rights, and yet there were women who kept saying, let's live up to the ideals in the Declaration of Independence, those ideals of equality and freedom and more, and women throughout history, and every woman in this book is a hidden hero because they kept saying, we need to live up to those principles that our country was founded on.
No, it's really, I should have asked you this at the beginning. How did you find these stories? I mean, how did you decide on these stories? Since they're hidden and you didn't know about them, and certainly I didn't know about them, and most people didn't know about a lot of these.
I mean, excavating women's stories is actually very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, the study of women's history is really only about 30 or 40 years old. And
wait, is that true?
Yes. And so and also by the time, many of these women too, they weren't considered important for their time, meaning that they were women. So their diaries were discarded, their letters were discarded, and so actually finding out a lot about them has been lost to history. So I got to work with an incredible author, co-author, Kate Anderson Brower, who was so great in terms of helping to compile these stories. Julie Morse, who's a producer I work with at CBS, also doing all the research. And there were so many, of course, incredible women that we wanted to include, and I write in this book, look, you out here that are great studiers of history, so I don't see this person in there, but please write about them, please share their stories. This should be the beginning of a project for all of us to uncover more of these great women in history.
We have to talk about Mary Edwards Walker.
Yes. So, you guys can see her I think on the graphics up there. Yes, so Dr. Mary Edwards Walker is there on the other side. And I don't know if you can see, she's wearing pants underneath her skirt. She was a Civil War surgeon. And actually, people talked about the fact that she wore pants. And I say, why are you wearing men's clothes? And she said, I don't wear men's clothes, I wear my own clothes. She actually wore pants to her wedding. Yeah, she wore pants to her wedding, and she refused to use the word obey in her vows. But anyway, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, I learned about from my sister, because my sister is an Army surgeon. But Dr. Mary Edwards Walker was the only female Civil War surgeon. And she wanted to serve, and they wouldn't let her. She went there to the front lines and just started working away without being paid. She was there at Bull Run and Fredericksburg, were some of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. She was captured as a prisoner of war. And because of what she endured, and she was also a bit of a spy too, so she provided some crucial intelligence during the Civil War, which you'll read about in this book. Because of what she did during the Civil War, and because she was a prisoner of war, she later received the Medal of Honor. So you guys, I'm sure you saw President Trump in the State of the Union awarded a Medal of Honor. That's that blue ribbon with that beautiful medal. It is the highest honor someone can receive for bravery in combat. 3,500 Americans have received that award. There is only one woman, and her name is Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. Okay, you think that's crazy? Wait till you hear this part.
But wait, there's more.
Wait, there's more. So in 1917, they try and take it away from her because she wasn't technically a member of the Army or the U.S. military because women weren't allowed to be part of the U.S. military. She refused to give it back. And she wore that medal every day of her life until she died.
I just love that.
Right? It's so good, so good.
Let's talk about, fast forward a bit to Seneca Falls and the Declaration of Sentiments.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, certainly when we went to school, we knew about the suffragists, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. We knew about Seneca Falls, the first women's rights convention. I had heard about, of course, the Declaration of Sentiments, but that's kind of about the extent, just those general sort of outlines of.
How many people here had heard of the Declaration of Sentiments? Not that many.
Yeah. So it is printed in full in the book.
Yeah.
And that is purposeful. And when they got together, and it was July 9th, I'm just reminded, yes, July 9th, they actually were, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were friends because they were abolitionists together. They had gone over to London to a big anti-slavery convention. They were told there they were not allowed to sit in the main audience. They had to sit behind a curtain because they were women. So they come back to America, they're close friends. They say, we need to have a women's rights convention. Okay, well, let's plan it in 2 weeks. Let's call it Seneca Falls. We need a manifesto. We need a document. We need a manifesto. Well, let's take the Declaration of Independence, crib some of the words, change it, and call it the Declaration of Sentiments. So instead of all men are created equal, it's all men and women are created equal. And then there's 16 bullet points about the absolute tyranny of man over woman. You should read it, because I had never read it. And the first one is, he has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. Another one, he has made her, if married, in the eyes of the law, civilly dead. And then the last one is the one that made me cry. And if you listen to the audiobook, you will hear how emotional I am. And this is what it says. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. And I bet there's a lot of women out here who've had a man try and destroy her confidence in her own powers, or to lessen her self-respect. And I tell the story in the book of when I joined CBS News, or was joining CBS News. I met with a senior man at CBS, and I was going to be the chief White House correspondent. And I met with this man, and he said to me, well, how are you going to cover the White House with 3 young children at home? And I felt, I don't know if this ever happened to you, when you get nervous, like your neck gets all red and flushed.
You can feel the heat coming up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I felt that, and then I just blurted out, and I said, do you ask men that question? And I so vividly remember I got into the car afterwards, and I called my husband, Chef Jeff, and he was so excited for me, because it's a big deal to be chief White House correspondent. As Dana knows, so few women have had that title. And my husband's like, how'd the meeting go? And I said, you know what? That guy is a prick. But had I let that man destroy my confidence in my own powers, I would have never sat in the chair, the same chair as Walter Cronkite.
Sorry, can I just say, the look on your mother's face is, like, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Was she like pumping her fist?
I mean, effectively, with her face, with her eyes, she was pumping her fist. As you should. You both, you did extremely well with this one. But can you just fast forward, because you brought up sitting in the chair, which is, I mean, okay, I'm just going to go off on a little Norah tangent here for one more second. So, yes, there are men who get the big chair and sit in the chair, and they anchor and they go off when there's a big story, and they'll do it from the field. But nobody did it like Norah. Because you, and I would send you texts about this, because I was, you know, one of many friends and cheerleaders from the sidelines just cheering you on. Because it was just so obvious that she worked so hard to continue to connect with people, to continue to, with regular Americans and people around the world, to continue to be a reporter and a journalist who didn't lose sight of what really matters. And that's definitely how you saw your role, and you still see your role as a journalist. But it isn't easy. It's not just executives who don't get it. It's the way that we're covered. And, you know, I'm just a, you know, girl on basic cable. You were the you know, successor to a long line of really prominent people like Walter Cronkite. And it's so much better. I mean, we are light years ahead of where these women in your book were because of the women that you write about in this book. But it's still not easy.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I got into journalism, you know, first as a print reporter at Roll Call and covered Capitol Hill, and then in broadcast journalism, was because I grew up following the news because my father was in the military. We lived all over the world. We were always had the newspapers in our house and we're always watching the news. And I admired and saw Barbara Walters. And I thought, who is this incredible woman who is traveling the world and interviewing the most important people in the world? And so I really do believe firmly in that if you see it, you can believe it. Our children look up and dream about becoming the heroes that they watch on social media or on television, whether they're sports stars, whether they're artists, you know, whether they're doctors and intellectuals. The stories we tell shape our culture and shape who we want to become. And that's why I want to make sure that more women's stories exist. Because I do wonder if I had known about many of these women in this book, I think it would have changed even my own sense of self, my own sense of power, my own sense of possibility, what I could dream and what I could become. And even in writing this book, I have felt a new power in my own voice, in hearing from and learning about
That's
these
so
women.
cool. Talk more about that. I love that.
You know, I'm not sure, I mean, I'm a journalist, so I spend my whole career interviewing people and listening to people, so I don't normally talk about myself. But I think what I've learned, and I write this in the book, I mean, I love the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, "The arc of history bends towards justice." It bends slowly, right? And every single woman in this book just kept fighting. They did not give up. They had a sense of what was right. They had a sense of what was in the Declaration of Independence, and they kept pushing this country to live up to those values. And so every time I have a bad day, or feel like somebody has said something to me that's cruel or mean, I just remember that these women had to deal with so much worse than we do. And we owe a lot to them because a lot has changed. And I really do hope we are at a turning point. I mean, Belva Lockwood ran for president in 1884 and 1888, first woman ever to argue before the US Supreme Court. When are we going to have a woman as president of the United States?
Do you have an announcement to make, Norah? You mentioned
that living in the District of Columbia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, huge base of support here. Very purple. Okay, so you talked about Martin Luther King Jr. So I do want to ask about just a couple of more women and highlight a couple more women in this book. Constance Baker Motley.
Oh my gosh, anybody know Constance Baker Motley? Yes.
There you go.
Okay, we all know Thurgood Marshall, right? First African American on the Supreme Court. Then we should all know Constance Baker Motley, because she worked hand in hand with him at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She was a lawyer, graduated from Columbia. She helped write the brief on Brown versus Board of Education. She was Martin Luther King Jr.'s personal attorney. When he gave the I Have a Dream speech in 1963 on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, she was right there by his side. She actually got him out of the Birmingham jail. But here's what's interesting. When Thurgood Marshall becomes a Supreme Court justice, she does not get the top job. A man gets the job. So again, Rejection, redirection. She goes to New York, runs for the state senate, gets elected, then gets appointed to a federal judgeship, becomes the first black woman ever to become a federal judge in America. This is before women even had the right to serve on juries. Okay, this is the 1970s. But here's the incredible, how I learned. So you asked, how do we learn these stories about, like, how did you choose these women? Well, when I interviewed Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and read her book, she tells the story in the book is that when she was a little girl, she was reading one of the magazines, like Ebony, and opens it up and sees a black woman who's a judge, and that they have the same birthday. And again, see it, believe it. And that's why Ketanji Brown Jackson ended up being a lawyer and a judge and dreaming of wanting to be on the Supreme Court. It's incredible.
It's really incredible. And then you talk also about, I'm looking for the name of this.
Mary McLeod Bethune?
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
Okay, talk about her.
I mean, this is, again, I mean, you can tell how excited
How did you
I am
read
about all the
my
women in these
mind?
books.
That was impressive.
Mary McLeod Bethune, well, she was the third woman in the graphic that we had up earlier. But has anybody seen the movie The 688 Battalion by Tyler Perry? Yeah, about the all female, all black battalion during World War II. They were sent over there because 17 million pieces of mail was backlogged, and they had to fix the problem because there was no mail, low morale, right? Remember, the only way to communicate back home was through letters. So they send over this battalion of all women, and they get the job done in half the time. How did those women end up over in Europe? Mary McLeod Bethune. She was a close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt's, and she was responsible for helping to integrate the US military so that women could serve. But her story, as I tell in this book, is absolutely incredible. Born on a plantation in South Carolina, actually after the Emancipation Proclamation, she was the 15th of 17 children. And when she was a little girl, she went up to the main house, and she was in the playhouse, and she picked up a book, and the little white girl said to her, "Put that down, you can't read." And Mary McLeod Bethune later recalled, "It just stuck with me, and I made a decision right then that I was going to learn how to read." And she became a great educator, founded a school for girls, black girls, with $1.50. The Bethune-Cookman College exists to this day in Florida. And then she was also, because she became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, she was the leader of the unofficial black cabinet in FDR's presidency. So just an extraordinary, extraordinary career. There is audio of her speaking during World War II. You can hear this booming voice of hers. But a great, great woman that I feel like, you know, when we wrote papers in school, like Mary McLeod Bethune should have been someone that we all wrote a paper about. And then the other, just last thing, I'll end on this because it's a great story. I mean, she actually helped integrate the White House, the Roosevelt White House. And when she went one time in the White House to go up to the residences, the elevator operator said to her, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't take you up," because she was a black woman. And she said, "Well, that's all right, I'll take you up."
Amazing. Redirect. There was somebody else I was thinking of, Sarah Grimke, who was quoted by, speaking of Supreme Court justices, RBG in 1973 before the Supreme Court, when she was arguing before the Supreme Court for women's rights. So that was another fantastic story. Norah, I do want to fast forward, and do you want to talk about her?
Well, I'll just mention briefly because, you know, I, of course, have followed Ruth Bader Ginsburg very closely, who we all, you know, argued 6 cases before the Supreme Court in the 1970s, won 5 of them, and is the reason that sex discrimination was declared illegal for the first time is because of all of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's efforts. But one of those key cases that she argued was Frontero versus Richardson. And in that case, she quoted Sarah Grimke, "I ask no favors for my sex. I surrender not our claim to equality. All I ask of our brethren is that they will take their feet from off our necks." That quote is usually attributed to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's on shirts, it's on hats, it's on mugs, but it was actually Sarah Grimke who said it. And Sarah and Angela Grimke grew up on a plantation in South Carolina. Their father was one of the largest slaveholders in all of South Carolina. And they left home and became some of the most famous abolitionist speakers in the country.
Sisters.
Two sisters. And so they have an incredible story. They have been written about before. There's been a biography written of them, and so people know. But again, I did not know their story, so we share that in this book. And they're just incredibly courageous women who, even though they had been raised by a very violent father, I might add, they were just incredible women who did so much to try to change the course of American history.
Speaking of a woman who was hidden behind very, very famous men, Katherine Wright. You might recognize the last name, Orville and Wilbur.
Everybody knows the story of the Wright brothers, right? We powered flight, okay? The Wright brothers. And of course, the first powered flight in Kitty Hawk. And one historian said there would have been no Kitty Hawk without Kitty Wright. And Kitty Wright is Katherine Wright, their sister. Right? They had a
Anybody
sister?
here know that there was a sister? Oh, okay.
So Katherine
You win
Wright,
the prize.
So Katherine Wright was the only member of the Wright family to actually go to college. She went to Oberlin. She was an educator, she taught, as most women at that time did. She also helped run the bicycle shop that helped fund a lot of these experiments. When Orville crashes the first plane, which is known as the first big crash, and kills Lieutenant Colonel Suffrage, which is the first fatality in powered flight, the Army is about to cancel the contract. Well, Katherine Wright goes and renegotiates and says, no, let's keep it on. She also nurses her brother back to health. Then she travels to Europe with them. She's one of the first women ever up in an airplane herself. The brothers are kind of nerdy and boring. She's gregarious, helps them win more contracts in Europe. She helped get them the Congressional Gold Medal, and President Taft said she was the most important member of the family. And here's her story is literally buried. Because if you go to where the Wright brothers are buried in Dayton, Ohio, you will see the signs for the Wright brothers. And you can go and see their grave. And you get to the grave, and she is buried right between them.
Is her name there?
Her name is on the actual grave between them, but when you go to see them, it says the Wright brothers, to get to the grave. And she's there. And so people don't know her story. But she, as I say in the book, she was essentially their COO, their PR agent. She kept everything running on time in supporting her brothers, publicizing their work, doing all that, CFO, all of that. And yet she does not get the recognition that she deserves. I think it should be like a Netflix movie that I should produce, don't you think?
Was she married ever?
She did meet a guy later in life, yes, and then Orville was very, what's the right word? He didn't want her to be with that man.
Oh.
So it broke up their friendship,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I was just thinking of a title like Ms. Wright or something like.
Oh, good, okay. You want to co-produce?
Now that
We
you've
can
asked.
work on that.
Thank you so much for asking. There is one story that I learned that you have in here that I didn't know before I watched The Gilded Age.
Yes.
But I learned it watching The Gilded Age, and I'm so happy that you included her story in here, Elizabeth Warren Roebling.
Yes. So we all know the Brooklyn Bridge, right? I know there's some people here who cross the Brooklyn Bridge every day. And at the time that it was built in the Gilded Age, was the end of the 1800s, it was considered the 8th wonder of the world, the largest suspension bridge in the world. It was an engineering marvel. Well, the Emily Warren Roebling. Well, the Roebling family that had started with her husband's father, he dies in the building of the bridge. Her husband takes it over. He gets Caisson's disease while essentially helping to build the bridge as well. He's pretty much incapacitated. So she takes over as the chief engineer. to finish the whole project. And when the Brooklyn Bridge is finally opened, she's the first to cross it with her teenage son by her side and a rooster on her lap, a sign of good luck. But as the chief engineer, she did not get the credit she deserved. But later in life, she demanded some of that credit. And there is a plaque for her now outside the Brooklyn Bridge. But again, I think there are many stories like this in history where, you know, there are lots of stories about famous authors out there, and it was really the wife who was writing the book. This was an example. People thought he was in charge, but she was greeting everyone. She was doing all the work. She actually went to Georgetown Visitation around here and was a math whiz.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, that's where she met him when she was, you know, in school and stuff like that. But she was an incredible woman, and again, an example of, and I say in the book too, did not get credit at the time, but the New York Times has done an overlooked piece on her. You know, they're going back and looking. So her story has been out there, and so we try and tell it in a new way here. But I think once again reminds us that so many women did the work. So many women were builders, inventors, and brilliant women who changed this country for the better.
I feel like there should be some kind of crusade to get like plaques and things on some, I mean, for example, the Katherine Wright. We need to change that. Or, I mean, this was already changed, you said, but there are so many examples that you have in the book.
Well, you know Pat Schroeder as someone who, since we covered the Hill together, and Dana covered the Hill for so many years and knows more about the Hill than anybody, certainly me, but Pat Schroeder was an incredible member of, and I write about Republican and Democratic women in this book. Pat Schroeder, one of the first graduates of Harvard Law School, couldn't get a job, moves back to Colorado after Harvard Law School, can't really get a job, and so she's like, oh, I'll run for Congress. Gets elected in the Nixon year, and stunningly gets elected and becomes the first woman to sit on the Armed Services Committee. But the chairman from Louisiana says, well, now we have a black man, Ron Dellums, and a woman, Pat Schroeder, and he said, you know what? Each of you have to share a chair. So they sat cheek to cheek. And I had heard that story when I had covered, because Pat Schroeder was no longer in Congress when I started covering her, but Ron Dellums was. And so I found out all this stuff about Ron Dellums, and that's when I had first heard that story. But Pat Schroeder is the one who made them bring back up the statues of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. She's the reason that there's women's bathrooms.
Now in Stat Hall.
Yeah, and she's then also the one who coined the phrase Teflon president for Ronald Reagan. And she also once said, Dan Quayle thinks that Roe versus Wade is the quickest way to get across the Potomac.
So great.
She was really funny, and a good example of someone who used humor to deflect a lot of the discrimination.
So funny. Believe it or not, we're almost out of time. I do want to ask about the last chapter, which is called My Lifetime, and it's about the last 50 years of American history, you know, talking about what we just said about Schroeder. The 1970s were a real turning point. You'll find the book is broken up into 50-year parts. So there's 5 big parts. And when I came to the last 50 years and talking with Kate and Julie and Mary Rennicks, our incredible editor who's here today, we thought to write about women, you know, you can't write about the Williams sisters in tennis and not write about all the other great women in tennis. And so we decided to sort of just write about my lifetime sort of more generally. And so there's a whole section kind of on how many legal rights have changed just in my lifetime. I mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what happened in the Supreme Court. You look at Congress. If you've ever taken parental leave, you can thank Pat Schroeder for that. Title IX, Patsy Mink, first woman of color elected to Congress, is considered the mother of Title IX, which barred sex discrimination in education. The reason all of those women did so well at the Olympics and had the opportunity to do so well at the Winter Olympics is because of Title IX, and we're seeing the fruits of that later. And so that's just to remember. I hope it reminds us all about our own agency to change the country for the better, to run for office, do what you can do to change laws, because I think the 1970s were a real turning point for women. The question is what now happens in 2026 and beyond. You know, I dedicate this book to my mother
and to my daughters, and for all the women in history who remind us that nothing is impossible. And so what changes in the next 50 years? And I think that's up to all of us, but I'm incredibly hopeful and optimistic about it. I write in the book, we're about to have the greatest wealth transfer in history, $54 trillion. Women will be the main beneficiaries of that. 12% of the world's billionaires are women. They are younger than the male billionaires. Will women start using money and power in a new way? Interesting to think about. I work with a lot of young women, and they are awesome. That gives me a lot of hope. I have daughters who don't take no for an answer and are charging forward and pushing this country and their parents in new ways. And so that makes me really hopeful about what we will see, in the next 50 years.
And I do also want to give a shout out to your son, who is, sorry, he's gonna probably be upset with me, but him having you as a mother and hard-charging sisters and their grandmother, and obviously the stories in this book is important for the men too.
Thank you for saying that. And people have sort of said, what can we do, or what changes things? And I have this shirt and it says, when women support women, great things happen. But I also believe when men support women, great things happen. And so part of this, and if we want to change, let's support and lift up other women. And whether they're in power where you work, or power in your community, or in your church, or your synagogue, or there's someone running for president of the United States, let's try and judge women on the content of their character and their qualifications, and not the stuff that's not relevant to them doing the job.
Amen to that. And I will just say, I get the final word here, that this woman practices what she preaches. She lifts up other women. And I thank you for that, and I feel really honored to be your friend.
Thank you. Well, right back at you. She does. She is always texting.
No, I got the final word. None of that.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.